Lila, only 7, trembled on the cold floor, her notebook clutched tightly. The cruel caretaker had screamed at her, thrown her toys, and slammed the door shut. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered for help, but the neighbors turned away. Her small teddy bear lay abandoned, a silent witness to her despair. Suddenly the door burst open. Her father, eyes blazing with determination, stepped in. "From now on, you're safe with me," he said, taking her hand. Could this frightened little girl finally escape the darkness she had known for so long? The rain pelted against the slate roof of the Wilmont estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the cliffs overlooking the misty coastline of Maine. Inside the house was unnervingly quiet. Ethan Wilmont, 45. A renowned tech entrepreneur stepped out of his black SUV, shaking off the chill from the relentless drizzle. His tailored navy overcoat clung to his frame as he carried his briefcase across the cobblestone driveway. After a grueling month-long trip to Berlin, negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal, Ethan had decided to cut his trip short. He wanted to surprise his daughter Lila, hoping to see the rare sparkle of joy she had once shown before the world became heavy for her. Lila, now 8, had always been sensitive, but her fragility was more than emotional. It was physical. Born prematurely with a congenital heart condition, she had endured years of hospital visits, specialists, and endless testing. Ethan had tried to compensate with everything money could buy: tutors, art lessons, a custom-built playroom, and trips across Europe. Yet none of it bridged the widening gap between them. She still avoided his gaze, and every attempt to touch her life felt as if he were trespassing into a fragile bubble of solitude. As he stepped through the grand foyer, the familiar silence gnawed at him. The echo of his polished shoes on marble floors seemed louder than usual, amplifying the anxiety curling in his chest. "Lila," he called softly, his voice catching against the walls. No response. No tiny footsteps racing toward him with open arms. Just an oppressive hush broken occasionally by the distant sound of wind rattling the large bay windows. His heart pounded as he followed the faint sound of muffled sobbing from the lower wing of the house, near the old greenhouse converted into a storage and play area. It was supposed to be a place of imagination, not dread. Ethan's stomach twisted when he pushed open the heavy wooden door. There she was, his little girl, crouched on the damp floor, one hand clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit, the other trembling over a half-finished plate of cold oatmeal. Her hazel eyes, wide and terrified, barely met his own. In the corner of the room stood Marissa, Ethan's new wife. 34, her expression sharp, controlling. She had the outward appearance of warmth, a carefully measured smile, and gentle voice, but her eyes betrayed something colder, calculating. "Eat it," Lila Marissa said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't want to see another bite left." Lila flinched, trying to bring a spoon to her mouth, but the effort barely produced a crumb of food. Ethan's chest tightened. The child's hands shook the fragile body, barely able to support her own weight. He had never seen such fear rooted so deeply in her eyes. "Stop," Ethan's voice thundered through the room, startling both Lila and Marissa. "What are you doing to my daughter?" Marissa's eyes narrowed, her smile faltering for the briefest moment before she composed herself. "Ethan, you don't understand. She's falling behind in school, refusing to eat properly, and I am pregnant. You need to trust me. Everything I do is for the family." Ethan's heart pounded as he looked down at Lila. Her little frame curled protectively against her stuffed rabbit. The flicker of hope in her eyes was fragile, but it was there, a silent plea for him to intervene. The truth struck him with a jolt. This was no longer just a disagreement over meals or discipline. Marissa's obsession with control, her insistence on bending Lila to her will, was suffocating the child's very spirit. He bent down, lifting Lila into his arms. She pressed her small face against his chest, shivering. For a moment the world outside the storm, the mansion, the cold rain, vanished. All that existed was this tiny, trembling girl who trusted him completely, despite the horrors she had endured. Marissa's voice cut through the air again, softer now, but dripping with authority. "Ethan, you can't protect her forever. She needs structure. I am doing what's best." Ethan's fists clenched, rage and helplessness colliding inside him. He realized with a sinking heart that this wasn't just about food or obedience. It was about control manipulation and a carefully built illusion to mask the harsh reality Lila had been forced to endure. And now with Marissa's pregnancy looming as leverage, Ethan knew the battle for his daughter's safety and trust was only beginning. He held Lila closer, whispering into her hair. "I promise. I won't let anything hurt you again." Her small arms tightened around his neck, a silent confirmation of trust, fragile yet undeniable. The storm outside continued to lash against the house, but inside a new storm had just begun, one that would test the limits of Ethan's courage, the bonds of fatherhood, and the resilience of a little girl whose voice had been silenced too long. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in Lila's dimly lit room, the rain streaking the windows, listening to her soft, irregular breaths. Her small chest rose and fell beneath the blanket, but the shivering didn't completely subside. He pressed a hand to her back, feeling the tremor of fear that had become a constant companion in her life. It wasn't just Marissa's harsh words. It was the isolation the small rules enforced with quiet cruelty, and the whispered threats that made Lila retreat into herself, like a delicate bird hiding from a storm. Ethan's mind raced. He thought of all the times he had left Lila in her mother's care, or rather in Marissa's care while traveling for work. Each absence, each delayed phone call now felt like a personal betrayal. How had he not seen the signs earlier? How had he allowed someone so manipulative into their home? The realization cut deep, sharper than any failure he had ever endured in business. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. The next morning he found Lila sitting at the breakfast table, her eyes hollow, staring at a stack of coloring books. She didn't move when Marissa placed a plate of food before her, or when Marissa's newly pregnant belly shifted as she crossed the room. Lila's fingers hovered over crayons, trembling. Ethan knelt beside her, lowering himself to her level. "Lila," he said gently, "do you want to show me what you drew yesterday?" Her lips quivered, and for a moment she shook her head. Then, almost imperceptibly, she slid a small, crumpled notebook toward him. Ethan unfolded the pages carefully. The drawings were chaotic, dark, and heavy with unspoken emotion, a locked door, a looming figure with sharp features, and a storm of scribbles in red and black, almost violent in their intensity. I drew this when I was scared," Lila whispered, barely audible. Her voice was fragile, as if even speaking could break her. Ethan swallowed hard. Every line, every scratch of the pencil was a testament to her silent suffering. He saw the fear, and more importantly, the determination, tiny, fragile, but unmistakable, that she wanted to reach out to find a way out of the darkness. That afternoon, Ethan called in someone he could trust, a former colleague, Mara Jennings, a child psychologist and family counselor, known for her work with trauma survivors. Mara arrived with calm authority, her presence a gentle shield against the tension that Marissa exuded effortlessly. She knelt beside Lila, speaking softly, validating her feelings, coaxing words and gestures out of the child. Marissa watched from the doorway, her arms crossed her face, a mask of irritation. "I don't see why you need all this attention," she snapped. "She'll be fine if she follows the rules." Ethan stood up, his jaw tight. No, she won't. She's not fine. She's terrified, and you've made her feel like nothing she does is safe. This ends today. Marissa's lips twisted, and for a split second her composure cracked. You're exaggerating, she said. I'm just preparing her for the world. The world doesn't prepare children by locking them in fear, Ethan said, voice low but unyielding. I will not let you hurt her anymore. The confrontation escalated, but Lila, sitting quietly, finally found the courage to speak. Daddy, don't let her take me away, she whispered, her voice breaking, the words heavy with years of silent terror. Ethan's heart cracked. This was not just about control or punishment. It was about survival, the kind a child shouldn't have to endure. He realized that saving Lila wouldn't be a simple matter of discipline or negotiation. He would have to fight through legal channels, gather evidence, and withstand Marissa's manipulations, ones that would almost certainly include gaslighting, community deception, and perhaps even falsifying documents to maintain control. The thought of that struggle made his stomach churn, but he knew that he could not afford hesitation. Ethan spent that night documenting every incident, every fearful glance, every scribbled drawing. Lila watched him, her small hands sometimes reaching out to help, sometimes clutching her rabbit tightly for courage. There was a fragile bond growing between them, one that had been buried beneath years of fear and absence. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of hope. Lila's fear was immense. Yes, but it also showed a tiny glimmer of trust that he could rebuild, that he could fight for her safety even if the road ahead promised betrayal, hardship, and the shattering of illusions. By morning he knew the path was clear. He would contact the authorities, secure legal protection, and ensure that no adult could ever manipulate Lila's life again. The challenge was immense, but the stakes were even higher. Her safety, her childhood, and the fragile possibility of a life unshadowed by fear rested entirely in his hands. The following morning, Ethan made the first call to the local authorities, explaining in measured but urgent detail the years of subtle abuse and manipulation Lila had endured. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Marissa had a carefully cultivated image in their neighborhood, projecting warmth and charm, the type of person people rarely questioned. But the truth, he realized, would leave no room for doubt. Detective Camila Ortiz arrived within the hour, a woman in her mid-30s with a calm but piercing gaze. She took in the household quickly, the tense silence, the careful movements of Lila and Marissa's tight-lipped expression barely masking irritation. Camilla requested to speak with Lila alone, and Ethan guided his daughter to the living room where the detective knelt at her level, her voice gentle but firm. Lila, she began, I want to help you. Can you tell me what happens when you're alone with your mother? Lila's hands trembled as she clutched her notebook, but after a long pause, she began to draw again. A small storage closet, a figure looming over her, and red marks indicating fear. She pointed to the scribbles and whispered, She locks me in here sometimes. And yells, I'm not allowed to speak. Daddy, please don't let her hurt me again. Ethan's chest tightened. Every detail confirmed what he had feared, and what had driven him to act. Detective Ortiz nodded, taking meticulous notes, promising Lila that she would ensure her safety. But the next challenge came almost immediately. Marissa, aware of the investigation, contacted her attorney, a sharp and calculating man named Vincent Hale. He arrived with an air of controlled menace, filing temporary restraining orders against Ethan and attempting to frame him as the overprotective parent trying to alienate the child from her mother. He submitted doctored emails, fabricated school complaints, and carefully staged documents purporting that Ethan was neglectful. Ethan felt his world tilt. The woman he had trusted, he had loved Marissa once, was now orchestrating a web of deception, and the legal system required patience and precision. He spent long nights in his small apartment, poring over documents, recording everything, and coordinating with Detective Ortiz to gather evidence. Lila watched him tirelessly sometimes, curling against his side as he fell asleep at the kitchen table. She understood in her own way that her father was her protector, even as the storm of legal and emotional battles raged around them. The community began to fracture under the tension. Some neighbors whispered doubts about Ethan echoing Marissa's carefully crafted narrative. Others, noticing the subtle bruises, the fear in Lila's eyes, and her withdrawn behavior, quietly offered support. Ethan realized the fight was not only in court, but also in reclaiming the truth in the eyes of those around him. One evening, as he helped Lila with her homework, she suddenly burst into tears. "Daddy, I thought maybe it was my fault," she sobbed. Her small frame shook as she buried her face into his chest. Ethan held her tightly, stroking her hair, trying to absorb her fear into his own body. "No, baby," he whispered, voice breaking. "None of this is your fault. You are brave. You are my little warrior." The next day, Camila Ortiz arranged for an independent assessment from a licensed child psychologist. Dr. Lena Moore, a gentle but direct woman in her early 40s, arrived to interview Lila and observe her behavior. She validated Ethan's concerns, noting signs of chronic fear, anxiety, and early trauma that required immediate intervention. Dr. Moore's report became a critical piece of evidence in the impending emergency custody hearing. Marissa, sensing the tightening noose, grew desperate. She began making veiled threats to neighbors attempting to isolate Ethan further, and even tried to bribe a school administrator to testify against him. Each act only strengthened his resolve. Every time he felt the weight of exhaustion press down on him, he looked at Lila, the tiny, trembling figure who had survived more than any 7-year-old should, and he found a renewed strength. Ethan realized the road ahead would be brutal. Not only would he face legal battles with an opponent willing to manipulate the truth at every turn, but he also had to rebuild Lila's shattered sense of safety and trust. Every day presented new challenges, explaining to her why her mother's words were not truth, helping her navigate fear and anger, and maintaining his own emotional resilience, while the court case loomed large. And yet amidst the darkness, Ethan glimpsed hope. Lila's small acts of courage, the way she held the pen, the way her drawings began to show sunlight and open doors, were signals that the child inside her was fighting back, that she was willing to trust again. Every tiny step toward expression, every whisper of confidence became a lifeline for both of them. The day of the emergency hearing arrived, and Ethan walked into the Manhattan family court with Lila clinging to his hand, her small fingers entwined tightly in his. The waiting room buzzed with subdued anxiety, but inside Ethan felt only a fierce focus. This was no longer a battle of papers or words. It was a fight for Lila's very sense of safety. Judge Helena Mercer, a composed woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, presided over the case. On one side sat Ethan, accompanied by his attorney Daniel Reyes, a middle-aged man with a calm confidence and an unwavering dedication to children's rights. On the other, Marissa Reynolds sat with Vincent Hale, her gaze icy, her posture calculated to radiate control. The hearing began with the clerk calling the case. Judge Mercer's voice cut through the tension immediately. "We are convened to determine the safety and welfare of Ms. Lila Reynolds. I expect all parties to focus on evidence, not emotion." Vincent Hale rose first, placing thick files of documents on the table. "Your Honor," he began, "my client is pregnant, carrying the burdens of her own health and a complex household. The child has exhibited withdrawal and resistance to communication. We submit Dr. Gregory Collins' report recommending limited stimulation, and controlled exposure. Ethan felt a jolt of anger ripple through him. The same doctor who had never met Lila directly had been enlisted to justify Marissa's control-twisting concern into manipulation. Daniel Reyes stood adjusting his glasses, his voice calm but forceful. "Your Honor, the idea that a 7-year-old poses a danger to adults or requires isolation is preposterous. The child's distress is caused entirely by the defendant's behavior. We have eyewitness statements, school reports, and now a psychologist's independent assessment confirming chronic fear and emotional abuse." Detective Camila Ortiz presented the security footage Ethan had painstakingly collected. The screen flickered to life, showing Lila being led into the storage room, her body stiff, her small hands covering her ears. Moments later, audio played of Marissa's voice, sharp and cold, cutting through the room. "You are useless. You must obey, or you will regret it." The courtroom went silent, the only sound the faint hum of the projector. Vincent Hale immediately objected. "Your Honor, the recordings could be manipulated. They do not prove intent or sustained abuse." Judge Mercer raised her hand. "Objections noted. The court will weigh authenticity, but the recordings will remain part of the record." Daniel Reyes presented the independent psychologist's report. "Doctor, Lena Moore's words were clear, precise, and damning. She detailed Lila's signs of trauma, withdrawal, anxiety, and fear responses directly associated with Marissa's controlling and isolating behavior. This child's well-being is at imminent risk," the report concluded. "Immediate protection is necessary to prevent further psychological harm." As evidence mounted, Marissa's composure began to crack. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for allies, but none met her gaze. Vincent placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture meant to reassure, but it only highlighted her vulnerability. Then came the pivotal moment. Judge Mercer turned to Lila, her voice gentle. "Lila, do you want to say anything to the court?" The little girl hesitated, then picked up the notebook Daniel had placed before her. With painstaking care, she wrote her letters uneven, but determined. "I trust my dad." She handed it to the clerk. A hush fell. Ethan's throat tightened as he leaned down, pressing a reassuring hand to Lila's small shoulder. Her eyes met his, brimming with tears, yet shining with courage. The judge read the note aloud, and for the first time that day, a tangible weight lifted from the room. Vincent tried to redirect attention. "Your Honor, a child's note cannot override medical records and professional recommendations." Judge Mercer's gavel struck sharply. "Enough. The court has reviewed the evidence, and the child's voice, however small, is part of this record. It will be weighed alongside all other documentation." Detective Ortiz stepped forward, presenting an additional folder. Inside were phone records and email chains proving collusion between Marissa and Dr. Collins to falsify reports and manipulate the narrative of Lila's behavior. The courtroom murmured. Ethan felt a cautious surge of hope. The truth finally was breaking through the layers of deceit. Marissa's face paled. She banged her fist lightly on the table. "Without me, you have nothing." Her words were sharp, desperate, echoing through the room. Lila flinched instinctively, hiding behind her father. Ethan placed a steady hand over hers, a silent promise that she was safe now. Judge Mercer, her voice firm but controlled, called for a recess to verify the authenticity of the evidence. The gavel's echo seemed to pulse through Ethan's chest. He squeezed Lila's hand, whispering, "We're almost there, sweetheart." Almost there. Outside the courtroom, the world felt momentarily paused. The storm of deception and manipulation had been exposed, but the hardest work healing and rebuilding trust was only beginning. and Ethan knew that every small step he took now, every act of patience, would define Lila's life for years to come. The courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, the atmosphere taut with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on Judge Mercer. As she settled into her bench, the gavel raised, ready to strike. Ethan held Lila's hand tightly, feeling the tiny tremors of her fingers against his. She leaned slightly into him, her small frame a fragile anchor in the storm. Detective Camila Ortiz stepped forward again, placing a new folder on the table. Your Honor, the additional data includes an emergency extraction from the defendant's devices, she said. We found a 3-minute recording of a conversation between Marissa Reynolds, Vincent Hale, and Dr. Collins discussing the manipulation of Lila's psychological evaluation. The intention was to falsely document that the child was difficult to manage and to justify her isolation. The clerk played the audio. Marissa's voice was unmistakable, calculated, and chilling. We need a report showing she can't manage herself. Dr. Collins, just put your signature. I'll handle the rest. Collins's voice, hesitant but compliant, followed. Vincent Hale's interjections were calm, almost bureaucratic. Priority must be given to our claims of family stability. Prepare the guardianship forms. The courtroom fell silent. The weight of betrayal, palpable. Ethan felt his chest tighten, fury and relief clashing violently inside him. Relief that the truth was finally emerging. Fury that such deceit had endangered Lila for so long. He glanced down at her. Lila's eyes, wide but resolute, met his gaze. She clutched her notebook, as if it were armor, a shield built from her own courage. Vincent Hale tried to regain control. Your Honor, this recording could be edited. It does not conclusively prove intent or manipulation. Judge Mercer's gaze was steely. Objections noted. The evidence will be considered in context with the full body of documentation. This court does not take lightly any act that endangers a child. Daniel Reyes rose again, voice calm, yet unyielding. Your Honor, beyond the recordings, we have verified chains of cash transactions, emails and falsified medical documents linking Dr. Collins and Mr. Hale directly to the defendant. The manipulation was not accidental. It was deliberate and systematic. Lila's safety is at immediate risk if she remains in their care. Marissa's composure shattered. Her lips trembled. Her hands clenched the edge of the table. Without me, you're nothing. You can't do this without me, she cried, her voice breaking. But the courtroom seemed immune to her theatrics. The tide had turned. The evidence spoke louder than desperation. Judge Mercer allowed Lila to speak again. The little girl's hands shook slightly as she picked up a fresh sheet of paper. Slowly, deliberately, she wrote her letters, small but firm. I trust my dad. She handed it to the clerk. Ethan's heart lurched. He leaned over, pressing a hand gently on her shoulder. I'm right here, Lila, he signed softly. The judge read the note aloud, her voice carrying the gravity of recognition and authority. Every person in the courtroom seemed to feel the weight of those words, the absolute trust of a child in the presence of her father. It was a silent condemnation of all the fear and manipulation she had endured. Detective Ortiz presented further documentation showing that the Department of Health had no record of Marissa's claimed pregnancy. Every falsified signature, every forged document had been traced back through an intricate web of deceit. Even Sheriff Dalton, implicated in the obstruction of social services, had been detained for questioning. Marissa's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. She slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing like a whip crack. You will have nothing if I fall. Her words dissolved into a ragged scream, and she sank into her chair, powerless. Judge Mercer raised her gavel. The court has considered the evidence presented. The manipulation, falsification of records, and deliberate endangerment of the child are clear. The child, Ms. Lila Reynolds, will remain in the custody of her father, Mr. Ethan Caldwell, until further review. A temporary restraining order against the defendant is enacted immediately, and all areas used to isolate or control the child are to be sealed for inspection. The gavel struck. The sound reverberated in the courtroom, final and resolute. Lila's small hand clenched Ethan's as tears streamed down her face. Relief, fear, and the remnants of trauma mixed into a cocktail of raw emotion. He drew her close, holding her tightly, feeling her breath slow as the tension drained from her body. Outside the courtroom, the sun was beginning to set, painting the streets in warm hues. Ethan and Lila stepped out blinking in the light of freedom. For the first time in months, perhaps years, they felt a world free from shadows. Lila's trust had been recognized, her fear finally acknowledged. And Ethan understood in that quiet, brilliant moment that the real battle was only beginning the rebuilding of life, the restoration of trust, and the painstaking work of healing from betrayal. The days after the court ruling were surreal for Ethan. Returning home with Lila felt like stepping into a space that was simultaneously familiar and foreign. Every corner of the house, every creaking floorboard held echoes of fear that had once dominated their lives. Ethan tried to imagine the rooms as safe again, as places where laughter could live instead of whispers and locked doors. Lila clung to him constantly. At first, her tiny hands gripping his jacket, as though he were a lifeline tethering her to the world. Nights were the hardest. Shadows on the walls twisted into menacing forms in her imagination, and the smallest creaks of the old house would send her into a trembling panic. Ethan would sit by her bedside, fingers tracing slow patterns on her arm, whispering, signing, reassuring, "I'm here. You're safe." Ethan called in Dr. Leah Simmons, a child psychologist and speech therapist who had experience with trauma survivors. Dr. Simmons moved with a slow, patient rhythm, her voice calm and deliberate. "We'll start with simple words, gestures, and small routines," she explained. "The goal is to give Lila a sense of control, of agency. Let her rebuild trust in the smallest moments." They began with the basics, "Milk Home Dad." Lila's handwriting was shaky at first, the letters uneven, as though her body was still remembering the tension of fear. But each correct formation of a letter brought a small smile to her face. A quiet victory. Ethan joined her in the exercises, learning to follow her pace, letting her lead, learning to wait instead of pushing. For months, their evenings were filled with repetition, laughter at mistakes, gentle corrections, and quiet celebration at every success. Outside, the world seemed brighter and gentler than before. Their neighbors, some of whom had remained silent during the months of abuse, came forward slowly to offer support. Linda Green, who had once hesitated to speak up, brought home-cooked meals and lingered in the kitchen sharing laughter with Ethan, while Lila explored the house with cautious curiosity. Grace Miller, the former nanny, arrived with gifts of crayons and notebooks, quietly encouraging Lila to continue expressing herself through drawing. Lila's drawings began to change. The storage room no longer appeared in her sketches. Instead, she drew open windows, playgrounds, flowers, and the people who had supported her. Ethan noticed the progression. Each page was a brick in rebuilding her emotional foundation, a visual representation of trust and love, gradually replacing fear. One evening, after a particularly long day of therapy, Ethan and Lila sat at the kitchen table. Lila pointed at her cup of milk and signed, "Thank you." Ethan smiled, signing back, "You're welcome." It was such a small gesture, yet it carried immense weight. It was a language they shared, a ritual of safety and presence. Ethan realized that healing was not about grand declarations. It was in these small, consistent acts of care and attention. The neighborhood began to feel like a community again. At the local center, a small gathering was held to recognize those who had helped bring the truth to light. Detective Camila Ortiz spoke briefly, her voice calm but resolute. Linda shared a story of courage, finally speaking the words she had once kept inside. Grace stood trembling, holding the microphone, as she recounted small but crucial moments that helped expose the abuse. The applause was gentle but sincere. Lila walked beside her father, carrying a new drawing, her home. Her son, her father's hand, stretched out in protection. At the bottom in clear letters, she wrote, "Home." Ethan bent down, placing a hand on the roof of the drawn house, inhaling deeply. In that simple act, he felt the weight of months of fear, helplessness, and betrayal lift slightly. Each supportive gesture, each acknowledgement of truth had brought them closer to safety, to healing. Lila no longer flinched at the sound of his voice or the creak of a floorboard. Yet the work was far from over. The legal battle had won her physical safety, but the scars of manipulation and fear ran deep. Each day demanded patience, love, and careful attention. Healing, Ethan realized, was an active process, a constant choice to stay present, to listen, to validate, to guide. And Lila, for all her trauma, was already showing signs of resilience. Her small hands, once curled in fear, now reached out for connection. Her eyes, once wide with terror, now held cautious trust, growing steadily brighter. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between freedom and lingering fear. Even though Lila was safe, Ethan understood that the shadows of the past didn't vanish overnight. She sometimes froze mid-step, staring at an empty corner, or flinched at the sound of a door closing too loudly. Ethan learned to anticipate these moments, holding her close, murmuring reassurance, signing slowly, "You're safe. You're loved." At school, Lila struggled at first. Though her teachers were supportive, other children didn't understand why she sometimes refused to join activities, or why her handwriting trembled like a bird's wings in the wind. Ethan spent long afternoons with her recreating school lessons at home, building routines that would help her feel grounded. Each small success, a completed worksheet, a smile exchanged with a classmate, was celebrated like a victory. But the emotional landscape wasn't linear. Lila occasionally lashed out in sudden bursts, frustration spilling from months of suppressed fear and anger. Ethan held her as she sobbed into his shoulder, feeling the weight of her emotions crash against him. There were nights when he cried silently, too exhausted by the constant vigilance and the haunting images of the abuse she had endured. Yet in these moments he found strength in his resolve. He would not let fear dominate their lives again. One late afternoon, a package arrived at the door. Ethan opened it to find drawings and letters from people who had supported them, Linda's careful sketches, Grace's neatly written notes, and even a letter from Detective Camila Ortiz, recounting her admiration for Lila's bravery. Lila took each letter with wide eyes, tracing the words with trembling fingers, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of unreserved joy. The letters became a bridge connecting her to a community that had once felt distant or intimidating, and she began to speak more freely in her small, deliberate way. Then came the first true test of their newfound stability. An anonymous message arrived threatening legal action and claiming that Ethan had no right to keep Lila hinting at falsified evidence and casting doubt on their case. For a moment, fear crept back into Ethan's chest, sharp and cold. He held Lila close, explaining in the gentlest way possible that they would face any challenge together. It was a test of courage and trust, and they passed it side by side. Therapy sessions intensified. Dr. Simmons introduced narrative exercises, encouraging Lila to tell her story through pictures and words. She drew entire worlds, now playgrounds with laughing children, kitchens where meals were shared, sunlit gardens, and often a small figure holding her father's hand. Ethan watched quietly, marveling at the resilience she displayed. Every drawing, every carefully chosen word, was a step toward reclaiming her voice and her sense of agency. Ethan also began to rebuild his own life. The trauma of the past months had left him hollow, but he started reconnecting with friends and colleagues, leaning on support networks he had once neglected. He shared small victories like Lila smiling without fear or successfully signing a new word, and each success renewed his strength. The household became a rhythm of small joys, morning routines with breakfast together, walks in the park, bedtime stories with soft whispers and gentle touches. The community, too, played a subtle but powerful role. Neighbors checked in not out of pity, but genuine care. Linda brought occasional meals and encouraged Ethan to rest. Grace often stayed to help Lila with art projects. Even outside the immediate neighborhood, the court's decision sparked conversations among families about vigilance trust and the importance of reporting signs of abuse. Lila's story became a quiet but powerful example that courage, truth, and persistence could reshape lives. One evening after a day of therapy, Lila handed Ethan a new drawing. It depicted their home bathed in sunlight with open doors and windows, flowers blooming, and the two of them standing together. At the bottom, in her deliberate, neat letters, she wrote, "I am safe. I am loved." Ethan felt a surge of relief and pride so intense it left him breathless. In that moment, he realized that justice had been more than a courtroom victory. It had been the restoration of trust, the rebuilding of life from fear and secrecy. The road ahead was still long, and they would face moments of doubt and setbacks. But for the first time, Ethan believed that they could endure them together. He understood that the true work of healing required patience, consistency, and above all, love. And for Lila, every small victory, every word, every smile, every drawing was a declaration that fear no longer ruled her world. Spring arrived with a gentleness that mirrored the subtle healing in their lives. The sun's warmth seemed to linger longer in the afternoons, casting golden light across the small garden that Ethan had started planting with Lila. Each flower became a marker of progress, both for the earth and for the fragile yet growing bond between father and daughter. Lila would kneel beside him, her small hands patting soil into place, humming softly, and Ethan felt the weight of the past months lifting just a little with each shared task. School became a sanctuary rather than a battleground. Lila made friends slowly, carefully, and Ethan celebrated each new connection as if it were a trophy. She had begun to speak more in class, signing and vocalizing at the same time, building confidence in her own voice. Teachers noticed the transformation, and even the children who had once stared curiously at her began to include her in games. Lila learned that being part of the world didn't mean losing herself. It meant claiming space for her joy and her safety. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Rooms that had once felt tense with quiet fear now resonated with laughter and conversation. Ethan started cooking dinner with her, guiding her tiny hands to measure ingredients, stirring bowls together, and occasionally letting flour fly across the counter. They laughed at the messes, the spilled milk, and the moments of clumsy teamwork. Each ordinary evening became extraordinary, because it was theirs fully without shadows looming from the past. Yet even in moments of joy, the lessons of fear lingered. Lila would sometimes awaken in the middle of the night, eyes wide, trembling. Ethan would hold her close, letting her trace the lines of his hands with hers until her breathing steadied. He learned to anticipate the triggers, the sound of a door slamming, a raised voice on the television, a sudden knock at the door. And slowly, carefully, he taught her that the world could be safe again, not perfectly, but with enough care and awareness to protect her. One afternoon, the community center held a celebration for families who had experienced trauma and healing. Lila and Ethan attended alongside Detective Camilla Ortiz, Linda Grace, and a few other supportive neighbors. Lila was nervous at first, but when asked to share a drawing, she stepped forward confidently. She unveiled a picture of their home, bathed in sunlight, with a garden full of flowers, and the two of them standing side by side. Beneath it, she had written in her precise, careful letters, "Home is love. Fear is gone." The applause was quiet but meaningful, and Ethan's chest swelled with pride. Later, as they walked home, Lila paused, looking up at the evening sky. She signed slowly, deliberately. "I trust the world now. I trust you, Dad." Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, signing back, "And I will always keep you safe. Always." Tears welled in his eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. The long, harrowing journey from darkness to light had not erased the pain, but it had built something stronger in its place, a bond forged through love, perseverance, and unwavering truth. Evenings were filled with new routines, gentle and intentional. They read together, drew together, and sometimes just sat quietly, hands entwined, letting the silence speak for them. Lila's drawings became chronicles of their journey playgrounds, shared meals, open doors, and sunlit paths. Each piece a testament to resilience, each line a declaration of safety and belonging. Ethan reflected often on the months of fear, betrayal, and courtroom battles. He realized that true justice wasn't merely the conviction of those who had hurt Lila, but the restoration of her sense of self, her trust in people, and the reclaiming of their home as a place of warmth rather than terror. The manipulative figures, Rachel Collins, Victor, and the corrupt sheriff, had been held accountable, but the most profound triumph was quiet, the small daily victories that reconstructed the rhythm of their lives. The story of their struggle spread quietly through the community, inspiring neighbors to speak up when they noticed signs of abuse, to offer support when someone was vulnerable, and to believe in the resilience of children. Lila and Ethan's journey became a living example that love, patience, and courage could restore even the deepest wounds. One night, as they prepared for bed, Lila pressed a drawing into Ethan's hands. It depicted two figures under a vast, glowing sun with a house flowers, and the words, "Light comes after fear." She signed one final message for the night. "I love you, Dad." Ethan held her tightly, feeling the pulse of her small, steady heartbeat against his chest, knowing that they had emerged from darkness into a life defined not by fear, but by love, trust, and the quiet strength of family. And in that embrace, they understood something vital. A home is not merely a place of walls and roofs. It is a sanctuary of hearts, a space where no one is ever kept in the dark, and where love is powerful enough to heal even the deepest wounds. The story of Ethan and Lila is at its core a profound exploration of resilience, love, and the enduring human spirit in the face of betrayal, fear, and injustice. From the beginning, Lila's world was constricted by manipulation and control, with her childhood marred by deception and danger. What makes this narrative particularly moving is not only the external conflict, the abuse, and the court battles, but also the internal journey of both characters as they confront trauma, navigate uncertainty, and ultimately rebuild trust. One of the most striking emotional threads throughout the story is the interplay between fear and hope. Fear is tangible, almost palpable, in the scenes where Lila is isolated, silenced, or witnessing threats from those who are supposed to protect her. This fear is compounded by a subtle yet insidious manipulation of the adults around her, who attempt to disguise abuse with justifications like stress or temporary measures. These moments highlight a harsh reality that many children face. Their voices are often dismissed and their cries for help overlooked. In Lila's case, the simplest tools and notebook drawings and gestures become her lifeline, her method of communicating the unspeakable. The story's treatment of parental responsibility and love is equally compelling. Ethan's journey is one of redemption as well as protection. Losing a spouse and facing his daughter's suffering placed him in an almost unbearable emotional position. Yet his willingness to listen, to act despite fear, and to trust his instincts illustrates the profound impact a committed and emotionally present parent can have. His patience, empathy, and courage transform not only Lila's life, but his own capacity for healing. The narrative emphasizes that love is not passive. It requires deliberate action sacrifice and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Conflict and hardship are also used to deepen the story's meaning. Betrayal by trusted figures, manipulation of legal systems, and attempts to fabricate reality create tension that feels both realistic and intense. These challenges intensify the narrative, making the eventual triumphs, court victories, regained trust, and emotional healing feel earned rather than convenient. By showing these layers of adversity, the story conveys that true resilience is forged not in comfort, but in navigating and surviving hardship. Emotionally, the story underscores the power of small, everyday actions in the healing process. Simple gestures, holding a trembling hand, drawing together, shared meals, signing, "I love you," become transformative. They symbolize the reconstruction of safety and trust in a way that is both tangible and symbolic. This subtlety teaches a critical lesson. Recovery from trauma often does not occur in grand moments alone, but in the accumulation of small, meaningful interactions that rebuild confidence, connection, and agency. The legal and social dimensions of the story also carry profound implications. The court proceedings, the presentation of evidence, and the intervention of law enforcement illustrate the importance of social structures and advocacy in protecting vulnerable individuals. It reminds readers that justice is multifaceted. It is not just the prosecution of wrongdoers, but also the affirmation of a child's rights, voice, and dignity. Detective Camila Ortiz and others who supported Lila demonstrate the significance of moral courage and professional integrity. These characters reinforce a key social message. Individuals in positions of power, teachers, neighbors, social workers, and law enforcement play crucial roles in identifying and stopping abuse. Speaking up even when it feels risky can save lives. Another central theme is trust and communication. Lila's use of drawings and sign language symbolizes the importance of finding ways to express oneself even in constrained circumstances. The narrative suggests that trust is not instantaneous. It must be nurtured through consistent, reliable, and loving interaction. Ethan's slow and deliberate efforts show that genuine trust takes time to rebuild, particularly after experiences of manipulation or fear. This reflects a universal truth. Emotional wounds require patience, empathy, and persistent reassurance to heal. The story also invites reflection on the broader societal lesson that vigilance and empathy are necessary for communal well-being. Neighbors, teachers, And even casual observers who notice small signs of distress can act as lifelines. The narrative encourages readers to consider their own role in protecting the vulnerable, highlighting that silence or inaction can inadvertently perpetuate harm. It challenges us to act even when the stakes are uncertain or the signs subtle. Finally, the story provides hope without minimizing the complexity of trauma. Lila's gradual recovery, her ability to trust, and the creation of a safe and joyful home illustrate that healing is possible even after deep betrayal. The conclusion, with its imagery of sunlight, flowers, and shared laughter, emphasizes that light follows darkness, but only when care, love, and conscious effort are applied. The story's ending does not erase past pain. It acknowledges it, integrates it, and moves forward with resilience. Practical lessons for real life emerge clearly from this narrative. Pay attention to subtle signs of distress. Children or vulnerable individuals may communicate danger indirectly. Small gestures or drawings should never be dismissed. Act with courage and empathy. Whether as a parent, teacher, or neighbor, intervening can be the difference between ongoing harm and protection. Trust and communication take time to rebuild. Healing requires patience, consistency, and reassurance. Justice includes both accountability and restoration. Holding perpetrators responsible is vital, but ensuring the victim's recovery and safety is equally important. Small intentional acts matter. Shared meals, conversations, or simple physical reassurance can have profound psychological effects. Ultimately, the story is a powerful reminder that love, vigilance, and courage can overcome even the darkest circumstances. It highlights the interplay of personal responsibility, communal action, and legal advocacy in creating safe spaces for children and families. By witnessing Ethan and Lila's journey, readers are encouraged to reflect on their own lives. Are we attuned to those who might be suffering silently? Do we act when confronted with injustice? Are we fostering trust, empathy, and resilience in our relationships? The story leaves us with a message of hope that even in the face of deception and fear, love and truth prevail, and that family in its truest form is not defined by walls or rules alone, but by trust, care, and unwavering commitment to one another.